Miss Puja Maskey. So Miss Puja Maskey is a former neuropsychology student with a strong academic background, including a master's degree in neuropsychology from the National Forensic Sciences University, India. Her thesis explored the intriguing topic of how emotion can affect false memories. Currently, she serves as the head of the neuropsychology department at Dalami Forensik, where she plays a crucial role in advancing the understanding of the brain and behavior. So today, she will be sharing her insights on Neuropsychology 101, covering the key topic like the role of neuropsychology, difference between neuropsychologists and clinical psychologists, the basics of neuron, and others. So without further ado, I give this time to Ms. Puja to share your insight. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. President. So good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar, Neuropsychology 101. So my name is Puja Maskey, and I'm excited to walk you through some fundamental aspects of neuropsychology. Without any delay, let's jump right in then. So understanding the neuropsychology. So can we please, dear host, can we please move on to another slide? Yeah, so these are the overview that we are going to be learning today. I will be brief on everything. So today we'll be understanding neuropsychology, what exactly is neuropsychology, evolution, and what are its relevances, and what is the role of neuropsychologists, what are the key responsibilities, how what are the work environment and applications, and difference between neuropsychologists and clinical psychologists. So afterwards, we will be understanding about the basics of neuron, which will be continued by our second speaker, Muskan Sharma. So moving on to the first slide. Understanding neuropsychology. So let's start with with understanding what exactly neuropsychology is. Neuropsychology is a specialized branch of psychology that studies the relationship between brain function and behavior. So essentially, neuropsychologists study how different areas of brain contribute to various cognitive functions like memory, attention, language, and emotions. The scope of neuropsychology is quite broad, covering how injuries, diseases, or disorders of nervous system can impact these cognitive functions as well as our emotions and personality traits. So this field is particularly crucial in understanding how brain abnormalities can manifest as change in behavior and cognitive ability. Moving on to another slide, we have evolution of neuropsychology, which is very fascinating. So it began with early studies of brain injuries, which gave us the first insight on how specific parts of brain are linked to behavior. For example, there was this most well-known case of Finneskeg. Most of us might have heard about this. He was the railroad worker in 19th century who survived the severe brain injury. His cases provided early evidence of how frontal lobe are involved in personality and behavior. So also we have pioneers like Paul Broca who discovered the area of brain responsible for speech production known as Broca's area, and Carlos Lee who conducted research on memory and learning. As the technology advanced, so did the field of neuropsychology. The department of neuroimaging techniques such as MRI, PET scans, etc., has allowed us to study different brain functions in a way which was previously impossible. So these tools have revolutionized our understanding of brain and continue to be essential in both research and clinical practices. So moving on to another slide, we will talk about the relevance of neuropsychology today. So why is neuropsychology relevant today? This field is vital in diagnosing and treating a wide range of cognitive disorders from Alzheimer's disease and dementia to traumatic brain injury, TBI, and strokes. So, neuropsychologists play a crucial role in assessing these conditions, helping to identify the specific cognitive deficits that a patient might be experiencing. This can inform the development of treatment plans that are tailored to individual needs. Additionally, neuropsychology contributes significantly to our understanding of neurological conditions. For example, through neuropsychological assessments, we can gain insight into how Alzheimer's disease can affect memory and cognition, which can lead to more effective interventions. So, in essence, neuropsychology at the intersection of psychology and neurology, which provides a deeper understanding of how brain function impacts our day-to-day lives. So, moving on to the role of neuropsychologist. So, let's talk about it now. Neuropsychologists are the specialists who focus on understanding the brain's influence on behavior and cognitive processes. Their expertise lie in assessing and treating cognitive deficits, emotional disturbances, and behavioral changes that result from brain injuries and neurological conditions. So they often involve conducting detailed neuropsychological assessment. These assessments are designed to measure various cognitive abilities such as memory, attention, language, and problem-solving skills. Based on the results, they can diagnose specific cognitive and behavioral conditions. They also play a key role in rehabilitation, designing personalized programs to help patients recover cognitive functions after brain injury. So, beyond clinical work, they are also involved in researches contributing to our understanding of how our brain works and how various factors can influence cognitive functions. So moving on to the next slide. Roles, key responsibilities of neuropsychologists. It is very diverse and critical. So one of these primary duties is conducting neuropsychological assessments. This assessment involves the series of tests that evaluates patients like cognitive abilities such as memory, attention, language, and executive functions. So the goal is to identify any cognitive deficit that may be present and to understand the underlying causes. Once the diagnosis is made, a neuropsychologist designs a rehabilitation program to tailor patient's need. This might also involve cognitive exercises, therapy sessions, and other interventions aimed at improving patients' cognitive and emotional well-being. So they also collaborate closely with other healthcare professionals such as psychiatrists, neurologists, and occupational therapists to provide comprehensive care to their patient. So this approach ensures that all the aspects of patient's conditions are addressed, leading to better outcome. Let's move on to another slide. So neuropsychologists work in varieties of settings. So it offers unique opportunity to apply their expertise. In hospitals, they might be part of neurology or psychiatry department where they assess and treat patients with conditions such as stroke, traumatic brain injury, TBI, or epilepsy. They also work in research centers, which contributes to scientific studies that explores how different factors such as age, genetics, and environmental influences impact brain function and behavior. And in private practices, neuropsychologists might work one-on-one with patients, providing assessments and therapy for cognitive and emotional issues. Also, neuropsychologists can specialize in forensic neuropsychology, where they can assess brain function in legal contexts, such as determining the extent of cognitive impairment in case of injury. Also another application is in educational setting where neuropsychologists help diagnose learning disabilities and develop strategies to support students with cognitive challenges. So moving on to the next slide. it is very interesting, neuropsychologist versus clinical psychologist. So it is important to understand the differences between neuropsychologists and clinical psychologists because their roles can often overlap but have like distinct area of focus. Neuropsychologists are primarily concerned with relationship between brain function and behavior. They assess and treat cognitive deficits resulting from brain injuries and neurological condition using their specialized knowledge on brain to inform their work. But on the other hand, clinical psychologists focus on diagnosing and treating mental health disorders such as depression, anxiety, personality disorders. And while both of the professions are concerned with psychological health, neuropsychologists they bring a deeper understanding of brain structure and function to their practices, which is particularly important in case involving that involves neurological diseases and neurological damages. And another one is educational pathway between neuropsychologists and clinical psychologists. Educational pathway for neuropsychologists and clinical psychologists are similar but have important differences. So both typically require doctoral degrees such as PhD or PsyD. For neuropsychologists, this training is often specialized in neuropsychology with strong focus on neuroscience, brain behavior relationship, and neuropsychological assessment. After completing their degree, neuropsychologists usually undergo additional postdoctoral training, where they gain hand-on experience in addressing and treating patients with neurological conditions. But clinical psychologists, on the other hand, they receive broader training in mental health, psychotherapy, and psychological assessment. While they might receive some training in neuropsychology, their primary focus is on treating people with emotional and behavioral issues. These differences in training reflect the distinct role of neuropsychologists and clinical psychologists in playing in assessing and treating patients. And there are certain practical differences between them as well. So they often have approach of like treating the same patient differently, reflecting their unique area of expertise. For example, a neuropsychologist might be called upon to access the patient who has experienced TBI before traumatic brain injury. They would conduct a comprehensive neuropsychological assessment to determine which cognitive function have been affected and to what extent. Based on their finding, they might design a cognitive rehabilitation program to help patients recover lost abilities. In contrast, clinical psychologists working with the same patient might focus on addressing the emotional and psychological impact of injury, providing therapy to help the patient cope with any depression, anxiety, or personality changes that might result from the trauma. While both of the professionals are essential in patients' recovery, their approaches are shaped by their specific training and expertise. So those were the things about neuropsychology. So let's move on a bit inside neurons. So in the basics of neuron, they are the fundamental building blocks of the nervous system. Neurons are specialized cells that transmit information throughout the body, allowing us to think, feel, and move. And every action we take, from blinking our eyes to solving complex math problems, involves the activity of neurons. There are billions of neurons in human brain, each forming thousands of connections with other neurons, creating an incredibly complex network. So this network is responsible for everything we experience as human, from basic sensory perception to advanced cognitive processes. So understanding how neuron works is very important for neuropsychologists as it provides the foundation of like for understanding how brain function influences human behavior and cognition. So moving on to the next slide. Uh, to understand how neuron function, it is important to know their basic anatomy. So each neurons has several key parts, each playing specific role in how information is processed and transmitted. The cell body or soma is the central part of the neuron and contains nucleus, which houses the cell's genetic material. Surrounding the cell body are dendrites, which are branch-like structures that receive signals from other neurons. And then these signals are processed in the cell body and transmitted down to the axon, a long, slender projection that can extend over long distances, sometimes even spanning your entire length of your leg. So, axon is often covered by myelin sheath, which is a fatty layer that insulates the axon and allows signals to travel faster and more efficiently. And at the end of the axon are axon terminals, which are small structures that release neurotransmitters into synapses, the gap between neurons. Neurotransmitters are chemicals that carry across the synapses to dendrite of another next neuron, allowing communication between neurons to continue. This entire process happens incredibly quickly, allowing us to react to our environment, think, and feel in real time. So, moving on to another slide. There is neuronal communication. So we are going to explore here how neurons communicate with each other. It is a process known as synaptic transmission. So when a neuron is activated, an electrical signal or action potential travels down to its axon and to the axon terminals. Once the action potential reaches the axon terminals, it triggers the release of neurotransmitters stored in small sac called vesicles. So these neurotransmitters are then released into the synaptic cleft, this the small gap between the axon terminal of one neuron and the dendrite of another. So neurotransmitters cross the synaptic cleft and bind to specific receptors on the surface of receiving neurons dendrite. Depending on the type of neurotransmitters and receptor, this binding can be, either excite the receiving neuron, making it more likely to fire its own action potential, or inhibit it, making it less likely to fire. So, this delicate balance of excitation and inhibition is essential for normal brain function and underlies all of our thoughts, emotions, and actions. So, different neurotransmitters such as dopamine, serotonin, and others play a crucial role in regulating mood, our attention, memory, and many other aspects of our mental and physical health. So, my last slide would be neuronal diversity. Moving on to that, it is very important to understand that not all neurons are same. There is a remarkable diversity of neuron, each specialized in different functions. Sensory neurons are responsible for carrying information from our sensory organs like eyes, ears, skin, or nose to the brain. They allow us to perceive the world around us by transmitting signals related to sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell. Motor neuron, on the other hand, carry signals from brain and spinal cord of our muscles, enabling movement. So they are crucial for all the voluntary movements like walking, as well as involuntary movements such as reflexes. So, lastly, interneurons act as the connector between neurons, primarily within the brain and the spinal cord. They play a key role in integrating information, processing complex data, and facilitating communication between sensory and motor neurons. So, interneurons are essential for higher order processes such as thinking, decision making, and controlling emotions. This diversity of neurons highlight the complexity of nervous system and its ability to perform a wide range of functions, all of which contribute to our ability to interact with it and adapt to our environment. So that would be it from my side. Thank you so much. Moving on to the next slide. If you have any queries, you can reach out to me in the various sites, social networking sites.
Thank you so much, Ms. Puja. Thank you so much for the beautiful and very interesting topic that you have delivered for tonight. So we are going to open for from the participants. If you do have your questions, you can unmute yourself. Also, if you're unable to open your camera, we still have chat box. You can write on it, and please do share your question. Our speaker will be answer to your question. Thank you.
In case you want to open your camera while asking the question as well, I have given you the permission, so you can do that as well.
Thank you, host. Wonderful topic that we have received from Ms. Puja about the introduction of neuropsychology and what is the difference between neuropsychologists and clinical psychology. Is there difference between both of the major? So once again, we are repeating, if you do have question or any inquiry, also if you do have some doubt, Ms. Puja will help you to get more point about the topic. Okay, I think we have to move on. Or maybe later if you do have question, because currently you still keep your question with you. After the second speaker, you can also ask question. So now we are going to move to Muskan Sharma. Is you here? Are you here, Miss Muskan?
Yes, ma'am, I am here.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, give me a second. So I'm going to introduce our really happy to Miss Muskan that you are able to give your time for us. So allow me to introduce Miss Muskan Sharma, a distinguished lecturer from National Forensic Sciences University. And currently, Miss Muskan also pursuing a PhD at the same university. So Miss Muskan is deeply involved in advancing neuropsychological research and education. Her academic achievements include receiving the prestigious Best Paper Award at the International Colloquium, I'm sorry, I have to read this, of Social Neuroscience from Tantrika, a testament to her significant contribution to the field. Additionally, Ms. Muskan fully qualified for the graduate aptitude test in engineering, or in short, it will be GATE, showcasing her extensive technical and analytical expertise. And Ms. Muskan's areas of specialization encompass to electroencephalography or EEG, functional near interfered spectroscopy, and many things about or related to neuropsychological, which is very difficult for me to pronounce all of them. So in which are integral to designing experiments, analyzing data, and interpreting complex results in neuropsychology. And Ms. Muskan Sharma is dedicated to enhancing our understanding of the human brain and behavior, bridging the gap between theoretical research and practical application in the field of neuropsychology. So we are honored to have again Ms. Muskan with us today. So this time I will give you to uh, share your valuable insight to us for today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for this beautiful introduction. I'm so glad that I've connected with this organizations. Thanks a lot. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I'm sharing my screen. Just let me know if it's visible. Is it visible, right?
Yes.
Yes. So, as Ms. Puja has already informed you about the structure of neuron and how it communicates, so I'm going to cover the process of neuron communication. Basically, the neurons communicate with each other through a process called synaptic transmission, which include both electrical and chemical signals. So, as she already informed you, what are dendrites, axon terminal. So, through these three main structure of the neuron, it transfers the signals from one neuron to another neuron. So the first neuron that transfer the signals are known as presynaptic neuron, and the other neuron which taken the signals from the presynaptic neuron are called the postsynaptic neuron. So we'll cover how does it happen. So there are three processes. So first is the resting potential. So before jumping to the resting potential, I would let you know that there are two different kind of ions present outside and inside the cells, which is the positively charged ion called cations that involves the sodium and the calcium ions that we have already learned in chemistry as well, and the negatively charged ions, which are anions that are potassium. Although the potassium is positive charge, but it is gathered within an anion, so it leaves behind the anion charge whenever and wherever it goes, and the chloride ions. So during the resting potential, there is the polarization of the neurons. So during the resting potential, the neuron is at zero, then it goes to the minus 70 millivolt. Millivolt is the action potential rate. So minus 70 millivolt, and some textbook it's like minus 90 millivolt as well. So the force due to the presence of oppositely charged ions outside and inside this cell, it leads to the attraction and the repulsion. This force, which is created by both attraction and repulsion, is known as electric potential. Electrostatic pressure. This electrostatic pressure leads to the electrical potential, which gives the axon an electric potential. So the first is the resting potential, then we come to the membrane potential. So before going to the membrane potential, the axon has to reach the threshold value, which is minus 55 millivolt. Now I'll show you, this is how the graph look like. So from minus 70 millivolt it goes to minus 55 millivolt, then it leads to action potential, and then goes to the resting state again. Now how this happened? So during the inactivation gate, resting potential state, this inactivation gate is open while the activation gate is not open. So the inside charge is more negative. It means the potassium and the negative ions are there more outside the cell. So outside is positive and inside the cell is negative. These when these activation gate open, the sodium channel goes inside the cell, converting into minus 55 millivolt, you can see here, and then the plus 40 millivolt. Now these sodium channels, when goes inside the cell, it turns into plus 35 millivolt. Now, I'll show you. It is very difficult for an neuron to reach the action potential state. This is why it showed that the failed initiations, because of these so potassium ions more inside the cell and the sodium ion outside the cells, it makes the different negative and positive. So for a single cell to reach it to the positive, it's difficult because the membrane potential, the semi-permeable membrane is more permeable to the potassium ion than compared to the sodium ion. So the more potassium ion inside the cell, the more negativity is there, and this negativity make the cell difficult to reach the action potential. Now I'll show you why this action potential happen then and how does it happen. So there are two type of summation. The one is the temporal summation and the other is the spatial summation. So in the temporal summation, what happened, only one neuron, the presynaptic neuron that I told you, put pressure, a lot of pressure to the other neuron, that makes it to the threshold. In the spatial summation, there are different type of neurons making pressure to one neuron, and this leads to the threshold. Once the action potential reach to the threshold, it automatically goes to the action potential where the sodium channels through the sodium potassium pumps comes inside the cell. Once the sodium channels comes inside the cell, there are more positivity inside the cell compared to the outside of the cell. Now, once the sodium channel come inside the cell, it reaches to the action potential and then transfer this action potential to the next one. So after the action potential, it comes to the repolarization state where the potassium ions are going out. So when the potassium ions are going out, it leaves the anion. As I told you that the potassium are more close related to the anions, which is negative charge. So when potassium goes out, it leave the negative ions inside the cell. So there are more negativity inside the cell comes after an action potential is generated. So this is going down again to minus 70 millivolt. And as I also told you that the membrane is more permeable to the potassium ion. So because of the lot of number of potassium are going outside, it reached to the hyperpolarization state, which is more than minus 90 millivolt. So once it reached the hyperpolarization, it again the action potential taking place. Now I'll show you how this resting potential, after coming to the resting potential, it goes to the neuron communication, which is the neurotransmitter. So before jumping to that, I'll conclude that this step is taking place in a 4 different steps. So first is the depolarization, second is action potential that I've already explained, then repolarization coming back to, and then the hyperpolarization in which it goes deep more than minus 70 millivolt. Now the neurotransmitter release, as Ms. Puja has already told you about the neurotransmitter release, I'll tell you that once the sodium ion is more inside the cell, it means it reached the action potential. So this sodium ion release the calcium charge inside the cell. These
Excuse me, Miss Muskan.
Yes, ma'am.
We are unable to see your paper.
Okay, I think the screen is stopped sharing.
Yes.
Yes. Is it visible now?
Yes. Nice.
Okay. Sorry
Thank
for the
you, Miss.
interruption. Yes, ma'am. So once the calcium charge is generated, this neurotransmitter release in the synaptic synapse. Synapse is the distance between the presynaptic and the postsynaptic neuron. Now these neurotransmitters are further reuptake by the dendrites of the post neurons. So these postsynaptic neurons have the receptors that absorb the neurotransmitter released by the presynaptic neuron because of the generation of calcium charge due to the sodium channels. So this is how the synaptic transmission happens. So the conclusion of the synaptic transmission is that it is a complex and sophisticated process, and it also difficult to explain it. And I think that for the introduction part of the neuron, it is sufficient to know about the flow of the charge. So it involves a series of events that allow neurons to transmit information throughout this nervous system. Now we will cover about the brain structure. So the human brain is like a marvel of biological engineering, and it controls different emotion, thoughts, planning, decision makings, and also there are like billions of neuron which is connected to the trillions of synapses, and that makes us. So the anatomy of the brain. The brain is divided into two parts. One is left hemisphere and the second is the right hemisphere. So the left and the right hemisphere is both connected by a bundle of nerve fiber which we call the corpus callosum that helps them allow to communicate and work together. Now there is the term which is lateralization of the brain, means that each hemisphere has their specific roles and responsibles which is responsible for a specific function. So the left hemisphere basically covers the language and speech, helps in logical thinking and reasoning, detail orienting process, and also math, science, and the planning thing. While the right hemisphere more focus on spatial awareness, visual spatial processing, creativity, emotional processing, and the nonverbal sides. Both these hemispheres work contralaterally. It means that the left hemisphere controls the right body part, and the right hemisphere controls the left body part. So if I'm a right-handed person, it means that my left hemisphere is more dominating compared to the right one. And if I'm a left-handed person, it means my right hemisphere is more dominating than the left one. So we'll cover this in detail. Now, the main brain is divided into three parts, which is cerebrum, cerebellum, and the brainstem. The cerebrum is the largest part of the brain, which controls are the vital important functions like thoughts, language, memory, planning, decision making, our emotions, while the cerebellum controls our coordinating movement, balance, posture, how are we moving, how we control our posture. So this is all controlled by the cerebellum. While the brainstem, which involves the pons and the medulla structure of our brain, pons control the sleep, while medulla controls the breathing, heart rate. So this is the function of brainstem. The cerebrum is itself divided into four lobes. One is the frontal lobe, which is at the functions. The parietal lobe, which is the behind the frontal lobe and responsible for speech processing, information, which include touch, temperature, pain, and pressures, also play a role in spatial awareness and navigation. Then the temporal lobe, which is beneath the parietal lobe and responsible for our auditory functions, language comprehension, and memory formation. The occipital lobe, which is at the posterior of the cerebral cortex and located at the back of the brain, and it has the visual association areas, which is responsible for vision, color, and processing. Now, frontal lobe. We'll cover the frontal lobe in more detail. The frontal lobe have main important areas, which is the prefrontal cortex, which involves the motor homunculus, which is responsible for our executive functions, working memory, and decision making. The prefrontal cortex is more responsible for planning and regulating emotions. This area is all prefrontal cortex. Now, the motor cortex, which has the motor ability controlling their contraction and relaxation. It also receives sensory information from the parietal lobe and make it in a more fine-tuned movement. While the Broca's area, which is responsible for the production of the speech, so any damage in this area leads to Broca's aphasia, and it's difficult to speak fluently if it is damaged, the Broca's area. Now the parietal lobe. Parietal lobe has the sensory homunculus, which has different areas, which is somatosensory cortex, visual motor integration, and spatial reasoning. The somatosensory cortex is for the sensation part, which includes touch, temperature, and pain. We are able to know what temperature is it, if it's too hot, too cold, or if the touch is soft or hard through this somatosensory cortex area only. The visual motor integration is basically helps to visualize information and coordinating it with the motor commands. So for example, like while we are writing, we write and we focus on our motor command as well as our visual things. So we know how to guide our hand while writing, or like catching a ball. So while catching a ball, like seeing a trajectory and using the ball visual information and to make our hands according to the ball. This is how the visual motor integration work. The third is the spatial reasoning. Spatial reasoning is like for navigation and for a representation of space. So in spatial reasoning, it helps in navigating a map to reach different locations using a spatial reasoning memory. Now, the sensory and the motor cortex is that I have told that this motor cortex, the motor homunculus, is represents the area which is responsible for the motor ability. So the large part covers the specific area. So, for example, in the motor homunculus, this finger use the motor movement is enlarged here, while the mouth, which also involves the motor muscles, is large here. In sensory cortex, it shows that eyes, nose, lips, and the skin is all involves the sensations. So in the sensory cortex, all these area is responsible. So the somatosensory cortex is in parietal lobe, while the motor cortex is in frontal lobe. Now we'll cover the temporal lobe, which is involves the different areas responsible for auditory cortex, like we have V1 and V2, which this A1 and A2, which is auditory cortex. Then the hippocampus, which is help in consolidating the memory. It transfers the short-term memory to a long-term memory, and help to recall it in later. Amygdala, which is responsible for the emotions, fear, and anxiety. It helps in emotional memories and associating emotions with specific experience. So all these areas are present in the temporal lobe. The occipital, which is at the back of the brain, has different V1, V2, V3 areas, which is responsible for visual cortex to find the visual fields and like creating it what we see, including color, shapes, and movements. The color processing, which is like color information to help color information, its shades, its intensity of color. Then the motion perceptions, which include the information about movement, allowing us to perceive changes in position and direction of objects. Also help to find the depth perception, okay, how much dense a thing is, to sense of depth and distance, which allow to perceive the world in 3 dimensions. So this is the role of occipital lobe. Now the cerebellum and brainstem, that I've already explained, that cerebellum for balance, posture, and movement and the fine motor skills, while the brainstem is responsible for breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, and sleep-wake cycles. So it also helps as a relay center for sensory and motor information between the brain and the body because of the presence of the reticular formation in the brainstem. So this reticular formation helps us to convey the message from brain to the body. Also, it helps in alertness and attention. The limbic system. Limbic system is present in the subcortical area. The cortical area, which was divided into 4 lobes, has the subcortical area. Under this, the subcortical area has the uh, more than 4 different steps. The first is the amygdala, which is responsible for emotions, fear, and anxiety. The second is hippocampus, as I already informed that hippocampus is for consolidating the memory. It also plays spatial navigation, that I have explained that it helps in navigating the different maps and the location. The third is hypothalamus, which includes like hunger, thirst, body temperature, sleep wake cycles. It also helps in regulating the different hormones in our body. The thalamus, which is the relay center for sensory information from body to cerebrum. So it helps to tell if this certain information is allowed to go to the brain or not. Only if the thalamus allows, then the information passes to the brain from the body. It also plays a role in consciousness and sleep regulation. These are the functions. Specialization of the brain region, it means a specific brain areas involved in a specific function. So for example, language is controlled by the Broca's area and the Wernicke's area. Broca's area is for the production of the speech, while the Wernicke's area is for the comprehension of the speech. So if I'm saying something, you are comprehending it, it means your Wernicke's area is completely fine. So the memory is stored by the hippocampus that I explained you, the amygdala relating to emotions, and the prefrontal cortex. That's when a prefrontal cortex use the older memory to perform the planning and decision making. Emotions are particularly the controlled by amygdala, while the vision is controlled by the occipital lobe. So these are the some examples of the function specialization for brain and reason. So the conclusion of the brain is that it is remarkably complex organ and it controls the very aspects of our lives like emotion, like cognition, executive functions, this emotions, then decision making, vision, hearing, and everything. So now we'll see that what are the neuropsychological instruments that help us to understand the brain. The first is EEG, which is the electroencephalography, my favorite. So EEG is worked on the electrical activity of the brain. So there are electrodes that placed on the scalp and which taken the voltage difference from the two electrodes and make it in a form of waves. So there are different waves in our body which is responsible when we are doing a particular functions. We won't go that deep, but the EEG is helpful to measure the electrical brain activity, and this brain activity is same that we talked about, like the action potential. So it's basically the synchronization of all the action potential and take it into form of waves. So it has very high temporal resolution. It means that it detects changes in a brain activity in a very millisecond time scale, but has a very low spatial resolution, which means that it not able to take the information from the subcortical area, only the cortical and the pyramidal areas. So this is EEG, and it is responsible. So it is helpful to know about the anxiety if a person is suffering from like seizure, stroke, schizophrenia. It also help in BCI, which is brain computer interference. So it help in this BCI. Also in a neurofeedback, the EEG principle is used in neurofeedback, where a person is asked to control their own waves to control the particular brain activity. So you can see that neurofeedback is very amazing. Now the functional magnetic imaging, which is fMRI, and it works on the blood flow. So it here this, you can see the orange thing, it gives the picture like this only, and it detects the blood oxygen level in our brain. So it basically worked on the principle that when a brain area is more active, it consumes more oxygen, which is respond by increasing blood flow to that specific area. So we'll get to know that which area is more active during a particular function. So through this kind of images, it helps us to know that this particular area is more responsible. So it has very high spatial resolution but low temporal resolution, unlike EEG. So it is help in knowing the different neurological disease like seizures, tumors, also the psychological disease like anxiety and ADHD, schizophrenia. Then we come to the PET, which is positron emission topography. It works on a biological molecular metabolic activity of the cells. So the cells consume the glucose doing an activity. So through PET, we inject the glucose, which is known as fluorodeoxyglucose, into the bloodstream that travels to the brain and accumulates area in a high metabolic activity. Now this radioactive emits the positron. When this positron is entitled with the electron, it emits the gamma rays. These gamma rays are detected the emitted gamma rays are detected by this device that help us to know that which area is working or which area is consuming the more energy or the more glucose. So it helps in scanning cancer, tumor, treating response and detecting recurrence. So like disorders, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's and epilepsy disorder, is detected by the PET. Now come to the transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS. TMS is not a detecting device, it's an intervention. So TMS is basically help to stimulate a particular brain area. So if we are interested in frontal lobe, which is responsible for mood and cognition, so if we want to control the frontal area, we'll set this TMS in the frontal area. Now how does it work? This TMS will transfer the magnetic stimulation to that specific area that will change into electric potential according to the induction theory. If we pass the magnetic field, it will change into electrical energy and that will transfer the electrical energy. So it helps not working, so that leads to depression. So this, by triggering those cells, we can help to cure depression, anxiety disorders, even the Parkinson disease. So it's been very useful in the neuroscience field. Now, near infrared spectroscopy, NIRS, which is also work on the blood oxygenity level in the brain. There are the two kinds sets of electrodes which we placed on the scalp. The one is the source and the other is the detector. So source emits the infrared light which is absorbed by the brain cells. The brain cells absorb infrared light, the remaining they transmit it, they emit it back. This back emitted infrared is taken by the detector cells. Now, these detector cells carry the emitted infrared and help us to know that which area is more active. So NIRS is also used to study cognitive functions like language processing, attention and memory. It's been very useful in a research areas and also in clinical setting as well to cure the neurological disorders like the neonatal and pediatric stroke and brain injury. Also very helpful in the research field. Now the magnetoencephalography (MEG), which emits the magnetic field into the brain, which collects the magnetic field from our brain. So when the neuron transmit the action potential, it changes into magnetic field. This magnetic field is captured by this device and help us to know about the activity of the brain. So it has very high temporal resolution, way more than EEG. So this help us to know about the sensory motor processing, like we often used to study like sensory and motor processing and how the brain respond to visual, auditory or tactile stimulation and how we control it. So help in epilepsy as well. So these are the neurological instruments which are helpful in understanding brain and its function, which help further to know about the behavior, cognition, and emotions, which are the important headers or pointers in a neuropsychology. So thank you so much. This is from my side. If you have any doubt or query, please let me know, and you can contact me on this email ID also. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Muskan, for that insightful presentation on neuron communication. Very beautiful presentation. Now, this is the time also back again to the participants. So once again, if you do have your questions, any doubt, please open your mind and also your camera. We really uh, hopeful that any question for us, so we can sharing anything here. Wow, I think there is no question, so it's very clear for us, yeah. Okay. The presentation is very unique to many people, especially from my side. We hear people attend this webinar because we really want to have new knowledge about neuropsychology. So before the moderator, which is myself, to give the conclusion for both the topics, once again, I request if anyone wants to ask the question or if any doubt from your side during the presentation, I would like you to open your mic and please question. Thank you. Oh, we just received one note from one of our participants, Rose Sally. They really have nice and clear presentation. These have been interesting topics. So much once again to our speakers.
Thank you so much for this beautiful comment.
Dinner, which is there is no question. I believe every clear information from our webinar today. So, from our webinar is about what is neuropsychology. So it is the study of brain and behavior, and what are key responsibilities of a neuropsychologist. Before Ms. Puja already delivered her presentation about the responsibility of neuropsychologists and what are the difference between neuropsychology. Then we have also heard about, we also received the information, the knowledge about basic of types of neural diversity, which is when we talk about neuropsychology, it's very wide. It's difficult to get all the information in one day, like that, especially have also Ms. Muskan also talked how it has also thoughts and everything, vision, etc., and the synapses happens. The last thing that really important for us for tonight's webinar is how neuropsychologists in today's context. We can see before how Ms. Muskan explained very clear about EEG and also fMRI and PET scan, NIRS, and etc. Many things that are very informative for us from this webinar. So thank you so much for our two speakers for today's webinar, Ms. and also Ms. Muskan Sharma. Before we close our webinar, I would like everyone to open your camera because we are going to capture our moment for today's webinar. I request everyone to open your camera if you're able to open your camera. Miss Primrose. I think everyone is shy. It's okay. So, because we are only few people here, I kindly request Miss Puja to capture this moment.
Yes, please, Miss Ruth, it is done.
Come again?
Yes, please, it is done. I took the screenshot of it.
Okay. Should I do it? Okay, give me a second. Okay, because we are three only here. Okay, let us give our best smile for this moment. I will count 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you so much for your time, everyone, all the participants, especially once again. We really appreciate the time from Miss Muskan, as she's really busy because she's a lecturer and also doing PhD from National Forensic Sciences University. Once again, we thank you so much, and we are going to close our webinar. Have a good day. Thank you. Thank you, Miss Muskan.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone. So I'm going to close the webinar. Thank you.